all the preparation. Thanks, Margie. Appreciate that. Yeah, good to have you. We'll be very mindful of that. Margie's husband's one of the mayor's team leaders and is critical to the whole emergency response team. And so she's getting some pretty good updates. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing our slides. And I just want to begin by saying that I'm really grateful for Pauline, who has a lot of experience in the topic of coaching teams. That's not typically something that we've done a lot of at HLI. Mo's had some pretty good experience of that. My experience is pretty lightweight in that regard. But what we're going to do today is use our current models and use some of the things that you've already been exposed to in the just general course of coaching and show how those all apply to coaching teams. So we'll also spend a good amount of time on your scenario that we shared with you in advance. If you have the opportunity, it would be really helpful for you to go ahead and pull that up, or if you printed it, just to have that available so you have some background. It'll probably be after the first break that we really dig into that scenario in a deep way. So if you've not had opportunity to review it, that might be another good opportunity as well. One other note, Dan is, well, he's not in Tampa. He had been in the Netherlands working all week, and his flight was delayed, and he was sick. And so I'm not even sure he's home. If he is home, he's not healthy. So we're going to wing it without Dan as well. So I'm glad that this.
We got this.
Yeah,
This is a team.
And what makes me feel good is this group is so experienced that you're going to make it work as well. So I appreciate each of you. Let's see here. Okay, I'm on the wrong slide. So let me get back up to the one that we want to start on. That'll be the first of many exciting things that I encountered today, I'm sure. We are talking about, in Module 13, the element of coaching teams in healthcare. And it's our understanding that that's going to be a growing demand. And there are the objectives to describe the shifts needed from coaching an individual to coaching a team, and to be able to recognize the relationship dynamics. We've been talking about those a little bit regarding just how the individuals respond to them. We'll look more about group dynamics today and try to recognize what those imply for your coaching. We'll do a team assessment. It's one that we have used for quite some time. It's simple enough to be meaningful, but it's specific enough to really be practical. And then, of course, we'll be applying coaching skills to make sure that we increase synergy and performance and results. So in terms of the WABC, what they want us to accomplish is to build, formalize, and consolidate coaches' skills to have an effective coaching conversation as a leader to advance the performance and well-being of the individuals, teams, and organizations through their coaching journey. And specifically, we talked about knowing yourself as a coach, business and leadership coaching competencies, and then the business of coaching. This fits into that third one, the element of competencies. We're still in this middle section. We will not talk much today about engaging the team initially, but I'd encourage you to consider that. We will be in our breakout sessions. It would be appropriate to talk a little bit about contracting, but we're going to be assuming that we've been asked to join this group according to our scenario. And here's where we'll go. We'll start talking about the team coaching process, and Pauline will walk us through what the ICF would have us do. We invited you to watch a video. We've done some screen captures from that video, so we'll do that as a quick review as we begin. Then we'll talk about what are the foundations we need to introduce for a new team to set them on the road for success. Then we'll talk about assessing their breakdowns. We'll also talk a little bit about facilitation skills and how that applies to styles and balancing the discussion. We'll next go to improving team relationships and, of course, performance and results, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's start with the team coaching process, and I'll advance the slides, and Pauline, I'll invite you to comment on these as we go along.
Most definitely. Thanks, Wes. And so when it comes to team coaching, the ICF have released that new team coaching model and certification. And so it is an individual certification. And so I'm not going to go into heavy depth in the sense that I'm now going to help you certify in this area. It's advisable to actually continue to work towards that certification and or to bring in that as an individual piece. And most of you are familiar that the foundation of the ICF and the International Coaching Federation's team coaching competencies are built on the foundational core competencies within the certification of your level 1 and or level 2 coaching certification. So the first is around about demonstrating coaching ethical practice. And we've done the module on that. So you'll all be familiar with that. We did a huge one whole module on the ethical practice. And it's closely tied with one of the favorite ones that I love, which is the embodying that coaching mindset. And when we embody a coaching mindset as a core competency, it balances pretty much with competency 5, which is maintaining presence. Those two competencies work very much on how you're showing up as a coach within your coaching practice. Now, to give your coaching practice more structure, we're really looking at the other competencies that help you fold in those skills to be able to have that coaching hat on. And that is establishing and maintaining that agreement. And I would say that that is one of the biggest things that we look for, is to establish and maintain that agreement, right? So, and I usually call it a bookend, right? So we open with an agreement and try and get an agreement. We have a bookend on the other end, which is closing the agreement off in that coaching session. And then there's a check-in to make sure that we're on track. And so that's the bookend of the establishing and the maintaining the agreements. Cultivating trust and safety, evoking the awareness and listening actively come terribly in together, and using a curiosity mindset around those two things. And all of this is in the service of facilitating not only the client growth, but the coach growth. Okay. And so facilitating client growth is how will they take it away? But for you, facilitating coach growth is about understanding what you're learning about your client as you go along, which ties back into our coaching, embracing a coaching mindset. I'll get you to advance the slide, Wes. So in that pre-work video, what we established was the group coaching has some definitions around group and team. And so the big thing about groups is about a collective group of people that may or may not have something in common. Okay, but they want to be coached on something in common. Okay, so we're actually looking at that, and we partner with the group of individuals to really focus in on what it is. And so group coaching would be like what I'm doing here, which might be asking you each individually what you know about the ICF competencies and how we actually go about using those. Team coaching means that we've actually got a shared goal, and we have to have a purpose to where we want to go. So that our line of sight is actually going to move towards that. Okay, so teams are people who work interdependently in the context of a shared context. Okay, so when you're partnering in that, we're co-creating that process with them. As a coach, I'm in there and I'm facilitating, which is why we have team facilitation skills at the ready, where we can really work with the team to help them excel and or reach high performance. Okay. Now, just in the terminology that I'm using there, to reach high performance and or, sort of to achieve some level of excellence, almost lends itself to being a dysfunction. that teams are a dysfunction. Okay. And we tapped a little bit in on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later with Patrick Lencioni's work. But when we think about that, we also want to make sure that the coach is a leader in this space. ICF talked about 3 roles. And I just want to check in with you from the ICF core competencies. The 3 roles in team coaching that come to light is that you don't do this alone. Okay. The biggest thing is you don't do this alone. And so go in with a co-coach, someone else who can take a look at, sort of what you're not observing, because you're paying attention as a coach to the facilitation of the team. And then being able to seek out somebody that, and they call it supervision. It may even just be another coach that's providing some mentorship in that area as to what would you do in this period. Okay, so there's coaching supervision in this way. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask, is it possible to elaborate a little on, does the size of the team matter in terms of needing a co-coach? And any other insights that you know of that you could share about that?
Yeah, I would say that as a general thumb, one individual coach can probably have a team up to the size of 8.
Mhm.
8 is a nice number. That 8 to 12 range, really you start to look at the dynamic, and depending on the maturity of the team, Wes, is really going to depend on how much work that you need to do, because team coaching is all about the stages of team development. Okay, so we could have them at the very beginning of the team and they're just new, and then we then also have a mature team that is just clicking along. What do you need to do when they're just clicking along, right? They need a different intervention point. So think about their team development as a process. I've got some questions because I really want this bit to be a little interactive about what you've experienced, right? So Michaela.
Yes, thank you, Pauline. I was reflecting. We've talked about dyad and triad coaching, obviously, right? And then I was kind of like, what is that threshold? When does it move to that team and group coaching? So I'm glad we're touching on that, because it sounds like it's a little bit fluid. Probably it sounds to me that it might also depend on who is the sponsor. What are the goals? How are these people working together, and maybe where they're starting from? So if I hear you correctly, maybe in sizes under 8, or maybe let's say in that 5 to 6 up to 5 to 6 range, one coach might potentially consider, if they feel comfortable in that space, doing that by themselves. Maybe, I guess we always should have mentor coaching ongoing, versus really that threshold is in that 6 to 8 range, where really you're now moving into the larger group and you should have more of a team. Am I interpreting what you're sharing correctly?
Definitely, Michaela. And depending on the strength of you as a coach as well, right? And your comfortability with that team, a particular dynamic of a difficult team going through some change, even just having someone there to scribe for you or to support you and to what you're not noticing, or noticing the shifts in behavior when it comes to the team dynamic. So anywhere from 4 or 5, I would say, depending on what it is that we're trying to coach them on, can go upwards. When it comes to group coaching and people are working at their own common goal, right? And so it might be a fitness group, or it might be a health specific group. When you're coaching a group of people, that number, the dynamic of actually coaching rather than facilitating, ICF are pretty tight on I don't see the same tightness on WABC. But I do see there's like between that 12 and 20 mark. If you've got more than 20, they really go, are you really coaching, or are you just facilitating and educating? Right? So they look at the length of time that you're coaching it, and they look at the content of what you're actually trying to coach. This is, sort of Tony Robbins would say he's group coaching, right? But that's not group coaching, because individuals are not getting in there. So he would only be, if you see his master plan pieces, he would only be individually coaching, and people are looking in and observing the process. And you can do that as well if you've got a larger group. So if you got a really large group, I would call a fishbowl and call in the 8 people, a nice group in the center, so that people could see the group coaching and process, and they could observe it. Is what I would do. And I think Lori would have some views on that one as well. But Elizabeth, you also have a question. So
you answered one of those, Pauline, which was at what point is the group just too big to be coached? So you've spoken to that already. But our executive leadership team, so everyone who reports to our system CEO, has been in group coaching now for, I guess, at least 2 years. And one of the things that I've wondered about is there's often within, that long a period of time, we've had several changes. And so we've started out evaluating ourselves and coaching and giving one another feedback around the initial results of how we felt like we worked as a team. And we have redone that, but it's just interesting. And how do you think about just the changing dynamic of people, because they just frequently are going to change in these teams? And how do you make sure that the work is useful, knowing you're going to have people change out?
Yeah, and when people change out, Elizabeth, the objective for you is to model Tuckman's model of change, right? In team development, right? So we're going from the forming, the storming, the norming, performing, cycle, right? And then adjourning if we actually get to that piece, right? Your team is always in that development cycle. So even if you're coaching your immediate teams, you're going to be following Tuckman's model in that way. So you're always attending to the forming as somebody's coming in, because that dynamic, that team dynamic shifts. And when it comes to being able to see what that is, having someone else to see where they're in the development, because often teams, we get invited in to coach a team that is in a dysfunction, and that dysfunction is usually because people don't understand their roles. Somebody else came in to the group and they don't understand their role, and then roles got mixed up and nobody had that conversation again. And when teams are constantly changing over, we've got to do a pause or a timeout at a time so that we can actually recalibrate. So Lori, is there anything that you would add to that?
Just that has been my experience also, is that whole Tuckman model is so helpful to share with the team at the very beginning, and almost like have it available so that people can see where the team is at any particular point in time, and then to help them to really understand, well, what are some of the next steps to re-engage.
Yeah.
So I usually even just have it like printed out, and everybody on the team has a copy just as a reference.
Just as a reference. And so that being the foundation, I'll just share a story with you. So one team that I was working with in, and it's not healthcare related, it's government. When I was working in government, what I would do is the team was just forming, and we have multiple specialists from different areas, and they all have big opinions about their specialty, the same as what you would have in healthcare, right? And so part of that dynamic is about helping the team form. And so a large portion of my work at the very beginning is helping that team form, helping them get to know each other with values and vision and strategy, and putting down what it is that we're going to be working on. Then moving that dial with the team as they start to struggle with the content, right? They start to struggle with the project that they're working on and the battle that they're facing, right? So then we're actually into that performing piece. We would also take a moment then to actually evaluate on a regular basis, and I would be working directly with the leader of that team and giving them the observations of where I think that they could lead. And so as a coach, as part of my job and responsibility was coaching the leader so that they could lead effectively this team. What could they be noticing? And so you're equally helping the leader of the team so that they can be effective. It's never about you coming in and you being the star of the show as the coach. It's about deferring that back to the team so that they can be empowered and the leader can lead effectively. So any questions about roles and when it might come into play between coach and co-coach? You have a lot of experience. What is the level of experience that you are using in your current setting? That was a direct question.
Pauline,
I thought,
Helen put in the chat, does that mean you're also individually coaching the team leader?
yes, usually. And that's where you're walking with ethics and things like that. You're saying, what's the delicate balance here when ethically the leader might be the problem, right? When you got team members. I call it a conduit, not an ethical problem. You're a conduit and you have the ability, right? The agenda defender. Yes and no. Yes and no, Elizabeth. Is that might be the role that's assigned by the team? Is that the most appropriate role? That might be the appropriate role for the co-coach. I would give that one to maybe the co-coach, and or give it back to one of the team people to manage, not the coach facilitator.
What though she started talking about coaching our leader. This is what she coached our leader to do when we're meeting without the coach present. So it's almost like that role of the coach supervisor, or as you're mentioning, the co-coach, when we don't have a coach with us. Just in our every couple of week meeting, there's always someone assigned to watch for that. So
Yeah.
it was just kind of interesting, but that's how she approached that.
That's great. Good, good. So it shouldn't be the same as the person that's trying to facilitate that particular meeting. Anything else that anybody's observing around roles within your current teams that you see pop up and show that are really handy and useful?
Pauline, I think I'm struck most by the difference between group and team, which is of course totally obvious in the definition, but so much of what I think of group coaching is like coaching a group of our directors or medical direct, that are each doing their own thing. And whereas coaching a team is coaching them towards group efficacy, group goals, all of it. So of course, those are not hard definitions to understand, but lots of the groups I think of are really running separate lines in healthcare or in our organization. And so I'm struck by that distinction being, are they working towards a group goal, or are they all working at the same level or same sort of skill set, which is a very different approach and outcomes and everything. So not hidden, but made me think of that.
Yeah, different dynamic, right? So with how you're even going to approach the task. Yeah. So even taking the wrong, even assuming, making an assumption that we have a team when perhaps they're operating as a group can actually be a fail, which is a good fail to learn the very first time you do it. It's a good fail to have. It's one that you'll always remember, because it'll give you a chance to actually see, well, here I was assuming that they were all going to work in the same direction, and they're off running their silos, their individual fiefdoms, and not coming together. Okay, so always a good opportunity. Working with executive teams, as Elizabeth said, sort of we have to watch the leader, the main leader and this is why I say you become their personal observer in the team, is because you can sometimes see the dynamic of behavior which they do, which affects the team. And then you need to be able to call them out on that. Okay, so a good example is they have a team discussion, and they all agree on the direction that they're going. They agree on the change that they're moving towards. And after the meeting, they go individually to the CEO and bargain for their department's view, right? We can't do that just at the moment because we've got this going on. And if that person doesn't hold them to going back to the team and what they agreed to as a team, then that is going to be a dysfunction. Yeah, the meetings after the meeting, Josh. Yeah, none of those. Michaela.
I also was just reflecting on the fact that the leader by title is not necessarily the leader or the person that sets the dynamic in a group, right? And I mean, we all know biology, right? It works a little differently amongst mammals, how we figure out who is the actual leader. I would love to hear some thoughts from those of you who have experienced this. How do you come around that when you have that one or other person? And sometimes I think there's sort of that alpha and beta that are working in tandem to swing the group, or maybe they're even just below, they're challenging the formal leader in this, probably many times not even consciously, but they're, feeling like that's, being the devil's advocate, whatever it is, but they swing the mood of the group. Do you then peel those people out for some individual coaching? Do you maybe do a smaller group where you have those individuals who really hold power over the team? Because I've been in meetings where one comment, right, swings the entire mood and direction of a conversation away from the goal that you previously had, where the same comment made by somebody else would have not had that effect, right? I mean, it's not what is being said, it's who says it and how they introduce it. So I'm curious to hear some thoughts on that, because I see physicians sometimes play like tiger cubs, right? I mean, we draw blood and that's normal, because that's how you do that sometimes. And, getting in that, it might be an interesting way or coming around that, sorry, it might be interesting to at least hear at a high level. I know it depends so much on the situation and what in detail would happen.
Well, I think I'm open to other expertise in the room, but Michaela, if I'm hearing you correctly, the culture of the organization in that particular moment tells me something about the dynamic of how things get done and what is rewarded in this particular system. And the pure fact that they can get away with it means that it's a great reward. And so the moment that it happens, it needs to be called out. So a systemic coach, someone that looks at systems, could be well worth it. But Lori's also can hear the narrative. Lori's got some experience in narrative coaching, which can call that to account as well. And Lori, I'm going to invite you in.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things I think that we as a coach can do to support the team at that point. And I'm even thinking of kind of going back, and I know we're going to get to this, but it's like, what are some of the agreements that we've set at the very beginning of how this particular team is going to function and what some of the roles are? And at that point, when that type of, dialogue is happening, or someone is jumping in and maybe kind of really moving the direction of the conversation, it's almost like almost like call a timeout and kind of go back and engage the team again as to what were the things that we agreed upon at the very beginning.
Yeah. Anybody else with any thoughts
I might just
around?
briefly, Pauline, this is really just a tactic in the moment to begin to neutralize that significant shift. I found it helpful to ask the individual or individuals who raised that to say, okay, I'm curious why you said that in the way that you did. Would you tell me a little bit more what's behind that? It doesn't necessarily change the message, but it slows the energy down and gives me and others time to process. And so I find that really helpful just because of that. It's almost like a team can get whiplash hearing this. And so I just slow down that process.
And psychologically, if we talk about psychological safety, is it okay for the team to actually do this, to have discourse, to have an open conversation? And I would build in the opportunity where that becomes the dialogue, and it's not just a person at the top of the chain being able to do that. But I understand your meetings are not set up and established in that way because you've been trained in many ways just to deliver it in that format. So I would take it down to smaller groups and give people a chance to have voice in smaller groups and to see what emerges and facilitate it a little differently. And to see what emerges from within the group. Sometimes being the person to put it, as Wes says, is to challenge it and to put it on the table, to create that opportunity for that discussion might be well worth it. And we've done that before, where I've done that before in a large team that was having particular discussions. I called it a time out of time. I just called, I had the role to be able to say, let's just pause for a moment. Does everybody take a moment to breathe and to actually write down what's the most important point that you need to get across right now? And then move to a facilitation of actually just asking everybody's voice into the circle. And giving a moment then for everybody to have that. And then ask the very next question, which is, what are they observing about what just came into the circle? so that they can understand and bring in, a difference of opinion, the difference of voice. Well, I noticed that, perhaps Josh said this and that Galen said that, and they're at opposite ends. And what I'm concerned about is how this has an impact to me, and get them to speak from first person. Okay. What that might come. And so again, it's playing in the moment, sometimes being a really good and astute people watcher, and risking, and you can have some fails. Without the fails, you don't learn what to do and what not to do, because what might work for one group may not work for the next team, may not work for another team. Lori, is there something else to add?
No.
Okay, Wes, I think we can move on. So this next slide, a little bit hard to read for some of you on the screen at the moment, but it was one of the pre-work pieces around the team development modalities. And it gives you a bit of that time scale, Michaela, around how many, when should we do what size should we do what, and what are we actually doing? And so when we think about in the team building phase, we're looking at somebody that can instruct in that way, instruct the team development piece. In team training, we're looking at team dynamic, and we're looking at getting them to do something. And then you have consulting, mentor, facilitating, and the achievable sustaining the team at the end there. So team supervision. So the opportunity that exists in team coaching is big and broad. Okay, so there's a whole realm. Thanks for moving on to ethical practice. Ethical practice, now we have the opportunity to look at where you are. And when it comes to team development, we're really focused in on what conflicts might arise. Okay. And we're treating the team as a single entity. A single entity. And so we're not doing anything but building trust and transparency with the whole team. So if we have an outlier, somebody that's not quite in that fold or doesn't quite trust you in that process, then it goes back to developmental goals that we might want to actually achieve with those. But again, use the same structure. What's the agreement that we have with this team? Co-create that relationship and give an opportunity to continue to focus on what is it that this team wants to achieve, by when. And so a bit like Mo, I coach men's soccer. And the men's soccer teams in the university level gives us an opportunity to look at, okay, team dynamics, what's actually going on between the players and the coaches, right? And that dynamic, and being able to shift that focus in the maintaining the agreement, because most of the players come out with, they want to win. Okay. The team wants to win. Well, it's not about that to the coach in most circumstances. It's about player development, but it can't be individualized. And the same thing's going to happen within your teams in healthcare around player development. And then we have cultivating trust and safety, giving you the opportunity to see that, sort of high trust, talk about beliefs, surface any hopes and dreams that folks have, surface their ability. Next slide, Wes.
Okay. And I just want to say, I didn't know about your coaching soccer at that level. That's neat.
Yes, I sponsor a university men's team. Only for another couple of years, I think. I'm giving it up. Trying to
Very good.
So from that, when you cultivate trust and safety, you promote the viewing itself. What do we see from the high level? So your role as a coach can help bring perspective to what's going on. So observe the team, coach the team in trust and safety, where trust might be broken. Different words that are said in there that highlight the fact that, sort of as we said, somebody has an alternate opinion and takes the agenda off one way. Maintains presence, okay? Attending to the agenda set by the team and making sure that's top of mind, but helping have your co-coach assign them a role of noticing, sort of, and I'm prepping usually my co-coach. Here's a particular dynamic that's occurring in the team at the moment. I'll keep observing and seeing if this changes through the course of this particular intervention, right? In this particular, and I call it an intervention, is my interaction, that meeting is an intervention, okay? Now, I've had situation where two people are feuding in the actual meeting. They're disrupting the rest of the team. And I've purposely positioned them to sit beside me, one on either side. And just simply the layout of where you position people gives them the opportunity to actually change the dynamic. So be aware of that, particularly what you'll see in the dynamic of a physical space is those people will genuinely sit on opposite sides of a table. And then that becomes automatically in opposing view. They're automatically going to do that. So make them sit side by side, your first dynamic. And you say, how do you do that with grown adults? It's surprising what you can achieve without them even knowing. Wes, you're smiling because I can see a story arising.
I'm just thinking about doing that on Zoom and hitting the mute all button to break it up, I've never tried that. I guess it's an option.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than, sort of being able to do that. The Zoom, the virtual world, you can still do that. You can still play. Okay. Listens actively. Any of these that you want to delve in deeper, let me know. Listens actively. There's a different level of listening. I think that there, Otto Sharma calls it the fourth level of listening. Getting right down deep into that. You're noticing what's happening in the field, what we call the field, right? What's happening for each individual, what's kind of coming in from their field as well, and making that known as well. And that's why it's important to have a co-coach for particularly large teams. I've in the void of not having a co-coach, I've actually had individual team member coaching sessions. So I make sure that I meet with them. So if my team is like 5 or 6 people and I'm just doing it on my own, if I don't have a co-coach, I'll spend an additional amount of time to do individual coaching. Quite dysfunctional at times that we seem. Tell me more, Frank.
Yeah, thanks. I've prompted some thinking here through our discussion and reflection on something I've been reading about. I've been doing some work on a contract with a group of docs within our system, and thinking through how in that particular setting, there's this difference between the social interactions of that team and the market needs and the decisions that we have to make from a market standpoint. And I hadn't really applied that separation to team coaching until today's conversation. And maybe it doesn't really apply, but as I was thinking through it, a team functions through those social norms where you're recognizing the value of each individual and identifying the contributions that they can make. And team members have to feel, as you pointed out, safe, and they have to feel a trusting foundation and all those things that are important for a well-functioning team. But the goals of that team might very well be these market goals. You're thinking we need our network to have success from a market standpoint and very clear financial outcomes, and that might lead to decisions made with how our clinic structure works and how compensation works, some very clear market things. So as our teams are coming around making these market decisions, but with market norms, but making those decisions under social norms, I can see a real challenge or a potential challenge in how those conversations go if we're not mindful of separating those two concepts, so that too great a focus in a team meeting on those market norms could quash some of the sense of safety and the open dialogue and communication that leads to good results. And forgetting that need to focus on those market norms as an outcome might allow a team that is totally operating on social norms to fail to get the results that they need from that team. So anyway, it's an ill-formed discussion, but it's the stuff that's bouncing around in my head here. What, any response to that?
Yeah. It's interesting when we divide it into two. What I would notice and observe, Frank, is what transparency needs to happen in the moment of the team to understand that that's actually an issue. And so as a coach, could you surface that? Just as we've done here in your and my discussion right now, is surface that. Where might we as a coach bring some transparency to that and to put the issue on the table? So that the team sees what's actually going on and naming it. Lori.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, if we go back to like one of the beginning slides, the group versus the team, you know, Frank, when you think about this particular, you know, group of people, is it a group or is it a team?
I think it is asked to be a team, but functioning like a group.
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, that's the biggest thing in my experience as a coach, is us being very, very clear what it is, and then helping that compilation of people, I hate to even use the word group, but compilation of people understand what it is also. Because it really changes what the goals are and the dynamics and how people interact with each other. And
Now, thank you. I'm thinking through some of the structure on this very specific issue that I think reflect that, and how if I were coaching this team that I'm on, or this group team that I'm on, how would I address that? That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the next slide helps us with that, because we're actually now modeling, evoking the awareness, the challenges of the team's assumptions. Are we a group or are we a team? Oh, we're a team. Well, what's the team made up of? What are we working towards? And even just stepping back, sometimes we actually have to pause in the middle of whatever the process is. We have to pause and put it on the table, and then go back to, what is this that we're talking about? And so help them make meaning as a coach. And that, I think, Lori demonstrated that very, very easily, where, reminding the team what we've just gone through. Here is what I observed. Here is what we might be wanting to change or challenge. What's our collective awareness of this? And so that ownership, that dialogue can be, that's all that you're after as a coach. It could be the whole piece is around just creating some awareness about how we're acting, how we're holding the system back, how we're not having the right conversation, or where somebody needs to take it offline and two people need to resolve the issue that they have, or at least agree to participate amicably for the team's sake. So that evoking the awareness, I think, is the strongest role of the coach in a team setting, or even in a group setting, but I find it more in a team setting, is because you are an observer of what behavior, what patterns, what language is being used in the team. And what might invariably happen if we continue down that line. It's neither right nor wrong, and it's okay for whatever the team wants to do. And I think I shared this with you, the team that I had, in order for them to see the problem different, I needed to take them out of the actual environment that they were in. And so I took them to the art gallery for their next team building session. And how might this relate to the problem that they're trying to solve? And they came away with some brilliant categorization tools that an art gallery has for procuring their art collection that actually related to data management and monitoring data. Okay, so taking them out of the environment. And the crazy thing was, as a facilitator, I'll just give you this. A crazy thing was the tool that I used was actually getting them to read a story. So I pulled apart a children's book and I gave them all a piece and they had to put the story back together. Okay. Simple tool, right? But they had to have conversations that they wouldn't normally have, and they had to actually intermix with folks. So I gave them a task that they could easily put together and then tell the story. Michaela.
That's brilliant. I love that. I love that as a group activity. We were talking about the different environments. I can see that for efficiency these days, a lot of our teams are actually only coming together virtually, and there's such a divergence of whether or not people even know each other in person. And I recently realized that again, that somebody I've worked with not infrequently, probably for 3.5 years, I had not met her in person, although neither of us actually had realized that. And so for some people, you can make these connections, virtually. With others, it just doesn't work. So it sounds to me that as we're setting up this dynamic, understanding the context people are really coming together in, whether it's virtual, hybrid, what are the pre-existing relationships that's really important as part of the intake, and also what will be afforded to us to then work on that. Like, are you going to be empowered to take people, offsite, or if it's on-site, how can you empower that people can make their way there? Because we're, even within our organization, from pretty broad geographic, areas, it's hard to get people together in person. So it sounds to me that whatever kind of team coaching you might end up doing, those will be really key elements to understand prior, because it might limit otherwise what you can do. I don't know, the virtual is great, but it also adds complexity.
Offer a suggestion when it comes to doing it with virtual. It's the same as what you would do with an in-person. The virtual environment is a player. They are a team member. So the Zoom becomes a team member. So the virtual environment for you, when you think about technology in that way and you're facilitating in that way, it actually reduces the barrier because it is a team member that helps this team function. Lori.
No,
Any
it's just brilliant how you said that. I never thought of it that way, but it's almost like the virtual provides, in some ways, almost some immediate safety
Mm-hmm.
because you're not so connected in this live, like in a live environment.
Yeah. So the
Interesting.
structure of your meeting can change the way that we engage with each other. You can be intentional about designing it into the process. And it affords you so many other things that you can do. So I love the books. Okay. And this one's over to you. Almost. Yeah, so when we think about facilitating growth, think about what I just gave you there around Zoom and using the internet. Have that conversation, facilitate the growth for the team. How do we include this? How can we make it better? Engage them in the conversation. I will hesitate to say that very few people have had that conversation in their organizations. They just went straight to the platform and they kind of treated it like a regular meeting space when it could be so much more.
Thank you, Pauline. That's very helpful. And thank you, everyone, for the questions. What we've been doing is really defining how is this unique and how is it similar? And the dynamics multiply. And we've talked about facilitating versus coaching. And so I don't want to say that this is how you need to do things, but rather provide you a list of things. If you are in the role of managing the conversation and you've got especially a new team that doesn't yet have the relationships and the trust to be very forthright, there are some tactics that you can use just to encourage conversation. These can be done live or virtually. But the first 6 are on the screen just to quickly, we'll send these to you afterwards. But a good rule of thumb, if you're leading a meeting, no matter how long it's going to be, try to get everyone doing anything you want them to do during the meeting. Try to make it happen in the first 5 minutes. If you want them to talk and participate, get them talking right away. And it's best if it's a question anyone can answer. We often do something that's not really related to this particular session when we open up. It's helpful if it is related, but just the fact of getting people accustomed to, okay, the expectation is I talk. Okay, that helps. Keeping the conversation focused, that's the job of the facilitator. And that often comes if you make a very clear, concise statement at the beginning to help them say, this is our goal or our focus for this meeting. You know, avoiding questions that prompt obvious or general answers. When we're not sure what to say, sometimes we'll just ask questions that we know everybody knows the answer to. We're just trying to get people to talk. Unfortunately, that usually has the opposite because they're all thinking, well, that's so obvious, I don't need to say anything. So it's better not to go there. If you need to, ask one person instead of the whole group. The idea of using silence when it's appropriate, that's a very personal thing, and it's also unique to each group. But 2-second pause while you wait is not too much for anyone to tolerate. And then if you're struggling to get people out, Margie does this really well. Instead of asking the group of 12 or whatever to respond, especially if you've had a few responding and the others not, say, okay, I'd like to hear from either Chris or Elizabeth or Michaela. And this is the question. It doesn't matter which one of you answer. Here's the question. What would you have to say about that? That often gets an active response. If you've not been hearing from those people, at least one of those is likely to answer. The breakout groups, the equivalent of that face-to-face is really just turn to the person next to you or in groups of 3. And anytime things are feeling slow or you're feeling like people are not all having the chance to be heard, just 3 to 5 minutes of doing this changes that dynamic. And then someone can report out from those groups. The follow-up questions, often if we're a little bit on the spot, sometimes we try to keep moving forward when the best thing we can do is just ask them something as simple as, tell me more, which we've been practicing all the way through this. It works excellent in a group. The chat box is often a great tool virtually. I want to connect that with something that was mentioned earlier, that just to stop and ask people to write down their thoughts is kind of the equivalent of putting it in the chat box. Because now that they've written it down, now you can say, so what did you write, Ryan? Or what did you write, Lori? The idea of asking someone to propose a different perspective is really interesting because they don't have to own it. They don't have to be disagreeing, but they're just helping us round out the conversation. Ask if there are additional questions that we should be asking, not necessarily that they have, but should we as a group be asking a question? When we're moving toward a conclusion, asking them to then reflect on what insight they've heard frees you from having to come up with that list, and it also continues to keep them engaged. And then finally, one that is really helpful when I'm trying to move a group toward action is just to allow enough time before we conclude to say, what actions make sense? That's a little nuanced from what will you do or what should we do? It's a little bit softer and saying what makes sense. And that still leaves some room for conversation. People aren't just dictating, they're bringing conversation to it. Anyone, speaking of which, have a question about any of those or want to add to that list? Great, we'll send those to you afterwards. And I'm going to turn it back to Pauline because we're going to talk about how we integrate this U model into the group.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. And so when we're integrating the U model, I've brought forward a couple of authors that you can do additional research on and learn from as well. But two models of work, and I'll phrase the first one as Peter Block is a consultant, mostly from that regime. He was like the father of consulting. And his work is about empowerment and community building. And a big part of that is how do we fit this into the model? If we look at when many great things happen when a group of people work together, we want his approach to emphasize these 3 things: ownership and accountability. Ownership and accountability at the situate level. So when you're team coaching, we want to have ownership and accountability to the agreement that we have. We situate. Here is what we're working on. Have them have ownership and accountability for the humanized component within the team. Who are they showing up to be in that particular moment? Engaging the dialogue and engagement as they explore, and making sure that all voices are able to help co-create that space together. And by acting from a place of stewardship, not just stewardship for the objective or the goal that they want to achieve, the well-being and success of the team, but also towards each other as humans. Rather than setting up, either intentionally or through consequence, a dysfunctional organizational behavior, which might be siloing. Okay. So the what if. So we want to co-create that particular space. Lori, anything to add?
I don't think on this one, no.
Okay. And so then once we have the coach's role and coaching the team, then we can look at David Drake's role in helping coaches develop. And David Drake's work is all about the stories that folks are telling, all about the narrative and how to actually transform learning and integration, not only for the coach, but for the people within the team. And so when we look at that narrative coaching, we look at 5 maturities, both at the at each of the levels of personal maturity, spiritual maturity, professional maturity of individuals, social maturity, going back to Frank, and contextual maturity, or when we say contextual, the environment in which they are. Lori, what else?
Well, I think with David Drake's work, it's kind of like we've got these 2 different levels going on when we're working with groups and teams. It's our own awareness and our own stories that we're bringing into the space, as well as every single person who's a part of that team or that group. And so I think when we're doing, team coaching and group coaching, we're really, as coaches, aware of those 2 different levels. And so I was thinking, Pauline, as you've been talking, it's like when you're first learning all of this, I think it can be almost overwhelming and sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, group and team coaching is going to be exhausting, but it can be so interesting and so amazing and exhilarating at the same time. And it's just kind of like getting in there and practicing is what really kind of, I think, brings it to life. But
Yeah.
Initially, it can feel like it's a lot.
The beauty is not doing it from we're calling you in to do it because they're in
Yes.
conflict or they're in some sort of area of struggle. The
Yeah.
beauty is being able to formulate it from the beginning and watch it grow and watch it really, progress. Wes, sorry, I cut you off.
No. And it helps me to reframe it as I have all these people to keep this conversation going. And
Yes.
so in the very beginning, sometimes for me, it helps me just to say, so I'm here to facilitate, but I'm not here to carry the load. That's really your job. And so I invite you to be assertive and be engaged, and together we're going to find our way through this. Just some simple statement like that. It relaxes me if it doesn't help them much.
So a really good question from Elizabeth is around, as a coach of a team, you might have one set of data and the team has another, maybe different agendas of what you need, maybe what you're holding for them. Where can you be transparent at the point of, sort of what can be shared with the team and what is being shared outside of the team? So one really strong and solid practice when you're working with multiple teams, one team might have more, like the executive team might have more data than the department team. So when you have that knowledge, it helps you phrase questions that help them think in broader context. And so think of it not as knowledge you need to share, but think of it as knowledge that's helping you formulate a question that helps evoke awareness in the team. Is that helpful, Elizabeth? Because you don't have to divulge the confidentiality of that other meeting, but you can hold it. And we do this all the time. I'm sure Lori's done this as well, is where we know that we're going to close a department or we're going to close something. And now we're going into to actually do the team coaching and to find out where they're at before we actually do that.
Pauline, I guess I was thinking too, even about some of the group coaching. For example, we rated ourselves as a team on several different things. And generally, everyone chose the things that were lower ranking to be our situation. However, the coach was also coaching our boss at the same time. And, he may have had some areas that maybe weren't ranked as low, but maybe his desire for the team coaching was really around some of the things that didn't fall out. So I was just, when you were talking about situating, I could just see where there could be conflicts in creating that situation. And, I just think it gets tricky when the coach is not only coaching the team, but coaching one or more members of the team individually too, because they also have information of how you've rated one another and all of this. So it just that's what was in my head.
And coach the player that's in front of you, right? That's the
Yep.
first thing. Coach the player that's in front of you and coach them so that they're transparent and building trust and safety with each other. And where inadvertently they might be holding back part of the game that the other needs to play with is a key part of this openness and transparency. You're building psychological safety. Okay, so don't, as the coach, hold that role of, I have to hold this. Help them develop trust and safety, help them be present with each other, and help them challenge each other in new ways. As a coach, that's the most important piece, is to, let them know when each other is frustrating each other. Okay, so so when we're using David Drake's work, this is a really good example. What's the story that's going on behind this? Right? So situate, humanize, get them in that humanize area, even if you start with the humanize, where they can see the other person as a human, right? Then we can explore and co-create, and then maybe we're going back to situate and acting. So you don't have to follow, all of the lines. You don't have to do the you. It is helpful to use the you to drop the team down into that exploration together and to do that big exploration together. But sometimes you're going to need to take them to situate, to co-create, maybe back up to act, and then humanize them, right? So use this as a model to really generate some speed for the team's actions. Any questions? How are we doing? Okay. So two additional areas that you won't get in the ICF coaching regime, but definitely supportive tools for not only your team's growth, but also your own growth as a coach. Yes, over to you.
Pauline, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, instead of just doing one large break here at the top of this hour, we might do 2 breaks.
Yeah.
What we could do is we could cover the foundations and DISC real quickly, do a short break, then come back and do our first breakout into small groups, and then come back and maybe intersect another smaller break later on. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Sounds good for everybody else? Thumbs up.
Okay. So this is material you're likely very familiar with, but we just want to bring in the application briefly into the team conversation today. So in terms of what makes a team successful, we've already been referring to Lencioni's material. This is what you're looking at is one that we've used many times. It's really a combination of several different models, but the principles are very same and pretty universal, where that it's clarity that's the foundation, and trust, then the openness and honest communication. That's where the element of healthy conflict comes in. The idea of that's where you get commitment. It's this healthy conflict that allows us to feel heard and make a commitment. And we can't have accountability without that level of commitment. And so just to briefly turn that into this journey of high performance, we are talking about the forming, struggling, stabilizing, on mission, and high performance. It's very similar to the stages that we've talked about before. It just goes into a little bit greater depth and applying each of these categories of clarity, trust, open communication, commitment, and accountability for results. Rather than spending time going over these today, you'll have these as a part of your materials, and they make a nice checklist is a little bit strong. I'd say guidelines that you can refer to as you're planning for the session, or even refer to during the session. But we're imagining that this is something that's going to take place over time. It can also be a helpful diagnostic tool. We'll look at that in a few moments as well. Then there's always the DISC styles and how that impacts power dynamics. You may or may not know well the people that you're working with, and certainly not if you're meeting them for the first time, but just to be aware of these. There may be occasions where you actually want to give them some sort of self-assessment, but your recognition of them is what really makes a difference. It's also helpful to educate teams who do not already have a familiarity with this, just to introduce them to the fact that, okay, let's just recognize that some of us process out loud, some need to reflect internally, others are more quick to jump. That can help the team's self-awareness. And so things that we can do to address and pull out those styles, you've seen this before, sending questions in advance, and then asking them to read or write before they respond. The small group discussion, the rounds, calling on an individual. The idea of managing the talk time and the focus is often one that facilitators, coaches who are facilitating struggle with. It helps to have others helping you do this, but just keep aware that that's really your primary goal as a coach, is to make sure that you watch the conversation, that you redirect at the appropriate times, and to do this with buy-in from the group. Sometimes we need to stop and ask the group, is it okay if we move on with this? Or who feels like we need to pause here and actually address this? We're going to do a breakout next, but we're going to take this quick break first. You received the scenarios in advance, and Pauline, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Let's go ahead and briefly describe the instructions so that we can be thinking about it. Then we'll take a 10-minute break and then come back. And so would you like to share that?
So in our circles, in our coaching circles, we're going to try and put everybody into the coaching circles. I think there will still be enough in each group. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into that group, and we're going to spend some time to plan how you would address, as the coach, how you would address this. So have a discussion when you're in your groups. What would be the best way to handle the scenario? So you all received the case study around the team coaching model, would be in this format. So Wanda is the senior medical director for the community outreach, right? So you're going to be going in, and as a group, you're going to plan for the team intervention. And you have to meet with Wanda. Okay, so that's what you'll be doing. And then, so you'll learn some lessons in there. You've been given the outline of the coaching competencies there. And so, and you'll also have one of the faculty members in there, and they'll be able to support you going through that as well. Okay, so.
Thank you. So this will be our preparation the second breakout later on, we'll try to apply those into a role-playing situation in the same groups. If you would, why don't you just set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes? We'll resume in 10 minutes, take another break later on. But this way we'll be fresh so that we can have this, spend 45 minutes on this. Galen, what's your question?
Sorry, from the instructions, I wasn't sure if we're preparing for the whole, just for the Wanda conversation, how we're then going to help the team, or if we're also preparing for the, because it says 6 sessions for the team, but then you just said we're preparing to coach Wanda. So if you could clarify if it's both or one of those. Thanks.
It is probably going to be both, Galen, but it's a really good conversation to have with your team, your group,
So we'll,
right? So
the bigger picture is how will we help this
how
group?
would we approach it?
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Wes, I have a 10-minute timer. If you want, I can pop that up
That would be
and
great. Yeah,
I can share that and then everybody can be back.
super. We'll
Probably
see
hear
you.
some music.
I'm going to stop sharing here and let you do that.
Welcome back. So welcome back. Any questions arise from the break? Ready to do some work? I'm looking for head nods. Yep, I got a head nod from Danny and Elizabeth. Yeah, Rihanna's not quite there yet. Right. Okay.
And it would be helpful if if the first thing you did was just select somebody, report out once we get back together, because
Mhm.
we'll share what our plan is before doing that.
Excellent. Okay, Maggie, I think we're going to go in for 45.
45 minutes. Okay, that sounds great.
Right.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, everybody, off we go.
Well, I don't know how that did outstanding. The other group's got a high bar to meet based upon what our group did.
So let's have a conversation. Like, what did you notice? What went well? Oh, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Awkward 5-second pause.
So, so you can come off mute.
Well, I'll say I think, at least when I reflect on our group, which was awesome, I kind of thought our group, again, like they're all kind of various people on various levels, or we're all kind of the same stage of learning the coaching. To me, it felt like we were all thinking about the coaching principles that we've used and how to employ, like how do we stay true to those core principles as we build this? And I'll say, I want to say the challenge, the rich dialogue was when each of us was using those principles and thinking, well, should we start here or start there? We all kept having the core principles, but they're slightly, like we were doing a lot of what do we think is going to happen, and that may dictate where we start. It was just kind of, I think, fun to kind of listen to that dialogue, how people viewed, if you will, the onion slightly differently or the elephant differently. But we still collectively, I think, got to a really good kind of thoughtful process.
Okay. And my group, what happened? What went well? That's you, Josh. You're on.
I think that, to be clear, I disconnected for a second, so I got volunteered to report out. I think that we are so uncertain about where to go that we initially really latched on to what questions we want to get answered, like what questions because that feels comfortable to start brainstorming. Okay, what do we need to figure out? What do we need to ask Wanda? What do we need to talk to Wanda about? The how of then doing the group coaching session, we're all very uncomfortable with. So we were sort of maybe getting stuck on that piece of it. But as far as like the approach to things that we need to think about what we need to understand from Wanda, about the group, about their dynamics, I felt like we did a pretty good job. And then I think Pauline helped us have a group epiphany around how we need to then observe the group, no matter what we decide to do for the first session, then there's just a lot of the coaching principles that come to the front of needing to really observe the group, understand their dynamics, because there's what maybe Wanda says the group dynamics are, and then there's what the actual group dynamics are. So it comes down to the core of the coaching principles that we've been learning, of really observing the group, understanding who the informal and formal leaders are, who's taking all the oxygen, who, and then thinking ahead to how things would look in the second session, probably using the first session to really assess, and then moving on from there.
Ryan, did your group experience the same?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the challenge is, at least what I kind of observed, is a lot of us had kind of, when we read this, we're starting to think about, how am I going to manage individuals? Like, we had this whole discussion, should our first meeting be with the group collectively? Or in prep for that first meeting, should we meet with everyone individually? So I'll say we kind of understand them. And we've kind of flushed out their, like, who they are, and are there power struggles? And at least our group, as we thought through this, I believe we collectively landed at, obviously we'd have the meetings with Wanda, but then we would have the group meeting kind of as our initial thing, just to kind of see where people are at and see how they function. And while we didn't discuss, I think it was assumed that we may easily come out and say, okay, we gotta meet with everyone individually and rein this in. Or again, if we do our job well, maybe we can collectively start to get that voice, establish what our mutual goal is together in that first meeting, and kind of set expectations for the next meeting. But yeah, I think everything Josh said, we were right there.
So what would be even better if?
You elaborate. Even better if what?
If we're coaching Wanda and the team, what would be even better if, as coaches, what do we need? Elizabeth, you had an epiphany. I don't know whether Josh is on the same epiphany wave.
You mean, go ahead, Josh. I couldn't see if Josh's hand was raised.
No, if you had an epiphany, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think, I don't know if this is what you're talking about, Pauline, but just as we're coaching initially with Wanda, how do we help Wanda prepare for this first session with the team?
Yeah.
And how do we think about how she shows up, and discuss a little bit more about alignment of some of those goals, and how we bring the team together around those goals and provide that clarity, and of course, first trust and safety. But that's kind of what, at least maybe, I guess, you were thinking about.
Additionally, the innovation.
Yeah, the innovation. Yeah. Well, that was actually your epiphany, Pauline. It just,
I think it came from Josh. I'm going to go back. I think it came from Josh, because Josh said, what if we go to wellness at the very end and with the team? And what would that look 3 to 4 to 5 years out? And I think you called it a post-mortem. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
want to say
pre-mortem.
Pre-mortem.
Yeah.
Pre-mortem. Yep.
Yeah. What else?
Well, we discussed the challenge of, how much time we have, and, may not be appropriate or within scope to meet with every individual, but it seems like it would be helpful knowing, following your if question, is what are some of the existing leadership styles of Wanda's team, including herself. So it could be some opportunity for some whatever tool assessment, just to kind of give us the information without having to meet with every single one. I mean, I think that could be helpful.
Beautiful.
Talked about the idea of potentially having breakouts with each individual person to ask that question of what would help you feel safe to express your thoughts and concerns openly, because we had kind of settled around it might be, it depending on how the team is functioning, actually kind of uncomfortable to ask the question. You might not really get, it might not yet be a safe place for them to even answer the question if Wanda's in the room. There's so many unknowns about how this group works currently that a lot of what you need to do is assess that up front. And we kind of realized that there was a lot of ways that you could do that. The idea of doing assessments up front was also discussed. Mostly that was just to run up the bill on the front end of the coaching engagement. We learned that from Pauline, so.
Ryan.
Well, I think I'm just saying what was just said. When I've really valued having I'll say a facilitator, but a coach, where I think I collectively got better, even though I was, if you will, a member. And again, I will say every time I've done a DISC or an insight profile as a team, it has just amazed me. Again, I always give this a classic example of a surgeon who came to me and said, Ryan, who knew you couldn't swear at nurses the way you swear at your partners? Like, it was just that, aha, this individual had that people process emotions differently. And again, when I hear about newer leaders, my mind immediately goes there, is just to help people understand that even though we are all in medicine as a group, we do not all deal with our emotions, our frustrations, our opportunities the exact same way. And to me, it's just core. And I would love if there were time to actually go through that as an exercise, not the first one, I think, but in the second or third, to help people understand that we all view this differently and we respond differently. There's not a right. There's strengths and opportunities with each one.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I think one way to say what we were hearing was, in that initial meeting with the group, a goal is to affirm, secure commitment to the group and the process. Then the second or preceding meetings, it's to secure commitment to each other. Maybe, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think so.
Pauline,
so using that commit.
Sorry.
So go ahead, Galen.
This adds to what Wes was saying, but I found us going back and forth a little bit in a good space, but trying to figure out a flow between that of, are you coaching the function of the team? Like, what does it take to feel safe? How do we talk to each other, establish norms? How do we handle conflict? Or are we coaching towards the goals and observing how the team functions? So I thought there was some of, and even when you look at the competency questions on the handout, there's some of both. Where would this team like to head? That's a little more goal oriented. Or what do you each bring to that vision, is different than how do you handle conflict. So I thought there would be some flow of coaching the team function versus coaching where the team is going. And Josh said everybody in their group was really daunted by the task of coaching in a group. I actually find myself sort of welcoming it, because I find the intensity of the one-on-one, like I ask a question and it doesn't quite go where I mean, it never goes where you want it, where you're thinking it will, but then man, oh man, I'm in charge and I got to direct it. And this, I was like, there's input of behaviors and eye contact and words and questions in there. So I think the dynamic of this is like, I find the intensity spreads among a group. Lots to watch and observe, but I feel like you're getting feedback of how people answer. You're getting feedback of what they say. You're getting feedback of how the leader performs. I just feel like there's a lot. So sorry, that was long, but coaching the team function versus coaching the team towards its goals and seeing how they function are two aspects of this that I think are really important.
Mm-hmm. Very clear. I see you nodding there, Raquel.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we had such a rich conversation around that, and just really getting clarity from Wanda on, she has these lofty goals of like, what does a high performing team look like? Well, what does she think it looks like? And then what do her team members think it looks like? And we could go, like Galen said, we could go for hours on whatever feedback we got from that group. and observations we got from some of those things, and tied that into shout out to Chris for being in his real day job a well-being champion. He did that really well within our group, to talking about how does promoting wellness, what does that look like within the group? What is that leader doing, either to model it or detract from the well-being of herself and her group? So it was really a rich conversation.
Good. So so we touched a little bit on what we're learning from this. In order to really address the gaps, and we're going to go back to the presentation very, very soon. But just very quickly, can we get a handle on everybody's voice? What is it that you're learning right now about team coaching? What we've done this morning already. What are you learning? Go ahead, Chris.
You saw me go off mute.
Mhm.
Well, it's not so cut and dried. I mean, it's so multifactorial, and like when I'm hearing in this conversation that you get the head and the heart. I mean, yes, it's important to get clear on things like roles and responsibilities and, you know, mission and line of sight, but it's also important of how people work, how the together function as a team, whether it's social, emotional intelligence or leadership style. So everything is so tied, right? I don't see anything as really more important than the other. It's all has to be come to the surface somehow, how people work together, how they treat each other, the well-being, but also the structure too, the planning and that you know, and so on. So there's this, for me, this is where the art of coaching comes in, is there's so many interesting ways to go about addressing these areas.
Yeah. It's the art of coaching on a low budget, usually.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Because everybody thinks it's easy, right? Michaela.
Yeah, so acknowledging the complexity, but I also got the sense that if you're not skilled and you're not very intentional in setting this up, unlike with other coaching, you might actually do harm. You might be able to actually have very negative consequences. I think in individual coaching, while you might not necessarily, that's the sense I'm getting, but as long as I'm intentional with some things and well intended, I'm likely at least giving that person space, you know, to explore whether or not I'm a very effective coach, right? That's one thing. But in this group setting, I think there's a possibility of upsetting that balance and also unintentionally hurting individuals in their confidence, and not just in the group dynamic, but also promoting team dysfunctionality to the degree that people might disengage from their role and job. So I see some risk here if not done well, which is probably the reason why ICF wants to standardize around that and be intentional in creating some of that.
Great insight there, Michaela. Frank.
I'm struck by how when we were talking about individual coaching, it was described as this dance with your dance partner and you're dancing around a court. And I was trying to apply a similar analogy to team coaching. I'm struck, it's more of a flash mob where people are coming in from all over the place, and you got to get them to all be going in the same direction. Some people are going to be raising their hands, they should be lowering them, and some people are going to be turning one direction or the other, but it's still going to work out okay. As long as you've got a general consensus that you're headed in the same direction. So I'm going to be the flash mob coach.
Flash mob. That would mean coordination, Frank. So it's going to be the mosh pit for a long time until they actually get to the flash. The flash
mosh pit. Yes. I like that one better.
Yes.
I like these comments that you've just shared. I think that the group you're coaching will feed upon your confidence. And I just want to reiterate that your confidence is based on being calm and curious and the belief that together they will work together toward the best result. It's not confidence that you have all the answers and know exactly what's right to say, but maintaining that confidence is part of the gift that you give to them.
Yeah, one very early lesson learned in facilitation is that there is more experience in the participants than you'll ever have as as a facilitator or coach standing in front of them. The wisdom comes from the group.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the time when we need to take another break. How about if we cover a little bit more material, take a quick break, and then come back and do this last breakout?
Sounds great.
I
Thanks,
really
Wes, for
hate,
keeping us on time.
yeah, I hate to stop this conversation because this is excellent, but we'll expand on this just a little bit here. And let's see, there's my screen. Okay, so we're going to switch focus a little bit, not so much to new teams as well as how do we assess teams that are standing and try to address breakdowns. We've shared with you this team assessment. It's based on the criteria that we've been looking at, the 5 criteria. It just breaks them down into a little bit more detail. And it again reflects the opportunity that we have to look how far the team goes up this series of building blocks toward accountability. There are some strategies. We'll share these again in the slides so that you can have them. But just for a quick review, obviously when clarity is low, we need some alignment, whether it's processes or goals. Otherwise, we're in real trouble. Trust, again, it's about how do we diffuse people's feelings of anxiety or fear of being judged. And there's a list of things there that are true. When communication's ineffective, it's superficial. We're trying to get down to some real true conversation. And commitment is just lip service. And everybody, there's an energy that you can feel to help determine that. And obviously, our target is accountability. And I like the second one. When people don't challenge each other, that's a real tip-off that there's low levels of accountability. And so watching for these signs over time or discovering them in a standing team is your opportunity. So in terms of improving them, obviously the line of sight addresses clarity extremely well. And even if the opportunity is just to create a very cryptic one for this group at this moment, if they don't have anything else, anything that you can do to lay that foundation of a clear target is an excellent step forward. We typically often use this team compact about getting the results together. This is not, there's no prescription about when this comes in. It may be off the bat. It may be before your first meeting that you want to send it out in an email and get people's agreements. There's a variety of ways to use it, but the importance of it can't be overstated. Sometimes we have to educate a team about the value of healthy conflict if they're not really into that already. And one of the ways to do that is to not use the word conflict, but to just simply say, so I'd like to check for concerns or see what you're doing. Again, maybe to have that share with each other and then in the formal group, but being able to do that. Lencioni's quote, most reasonable people don't need to get their way. They just need to weigh in. We're watching to make sure that people are being heard. And then in order to get their opportunity to be heard is just fundamental. And then accountability, we often think of that as leader to the team, but what we're really trying as a target is to get this accountability among each other. How can we get them to hold each other accountable in a respectful, appropriate way? One of the ways to do that is this plus delta, to say what worked well and what can we improve. That invites accountability instead of impressing it on it. Another way to do that, what do we want to stop doing, start doing, and continuing doing? This is all language that's not loaded with the traditional accountability baggage, but it's an excellent conversation. And you as a coach can see, do they take to these or not? If not, then we need to go back down those steps and see, so where's the breakdown? Are we not having healthy conflict? Are we not actually having clarity? Where is it so that we can move back to a point where the group can engage in this kind of conversation? The other thing about goals, sometimes a group needs it to be more visible than just in a one-on-one conversation. So creating some kind of scorecard for your progress, maybe even something that you can share with them in a follow-up email. Even better, send out a scorecard, but don't put the ratings on it. And maybe at the end of a session or at the beginning of the next session to say, how would you as a group assess this? Maybe break them up into pairs and have them have that conversation and then come back and just have a collective conversation. Well, that leads us to our next opportunity, which will be some coaching conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to ask before we take a break and then come back and try to apply this in a more role-playing scenario? That sounds good. So what I'm looking at the clock is it's a quarter till. And if we can maybe just take 7 minutes this time, since we're getting near the end, and then we'll have 45 minutes for the breakout for the scenario. We'll try to start that before the top of the hour, so we can have 45 minutes and then a good half hour or more to debrief that. And then that's going to be our session for today.
Clockwork. They catch themselves in the moment. And when they get to that point of catching themselves in the moment, you don't even have to coach anymore. You actually have to elevate your game, and you actually have to see what else that they're not talking about, and challenge again. So they keep you on your toes. So it's always good.
Yeah. And I failed to mention earlier when I was explaining all the folks in Tampa with the hurricane and Dan coming back from overseas and being sick, I forgot to mention that Dirta is, I think she's well into her second week of struggling with COVID. And I don't have a lot of details, but she was nowhere near feeling up to joining us today, which had been her plan. And so lots going on in different parts of the country. So in addition to thanking Pauline and Lori for their expertise on this, I just wanted to compliment everyone. What you're bringing to this is making this a really energetic and valuable conversation. Okay, Josh is in day 7. Sickest you've been in 30 years. Oh, man. Well, sorry to hear that, my friend.
That vaccination is looking good, I guess, for this year, huh?
I was gonna say, get your shot if you haven't. I would have gotten it this week with my flu shot, but here I am, sick instead. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine's scheduled for next week. Well, I don't want to delay us any longer. Pauline, I'm going to go ahead and I'll share the instructions here on our
Excellent.
breakout, just so we'll know what's going on. So
For your coaching practice, this time you're going to assign the role, right? Assign who is going to coach Wanda and or the team, and you can allocate that yourself when you step into the conversation. And we want somebody to co-create the relationship. We want somebody to communicate effectively or focus in on that, the facilitating the learning and results, the team dynamics and cohesion, and the wellness initiatives. Okay. So you're going to focus in and around that. I don't care which way you mess them up. You can pick up where someone else left off. There's no prescribed measure that you have to go through that, but I want you to draw on all your learnings from all the sessions that we've done as an individual coach. And remember, when we're coaching an individual, we're coaching the person in front of us. And so when we think of team coaching is one identity. Okay, remember, it's a one identity thing. And so we're making sure that everybody is able to participate in that way and get that. So when that comes up, you'll notice it right there in that moment, that if we go off and, the radiology have one idea and the clinicians have another idea, right? That's not a one identity. Okay, so how do you get them to come back in to the one identity? Okay, so 45, we probably can do it in 40 minutes, and that would give us a good 20. But I think 45 minutes, if you've got an extra 5 minutes at the end, you'll probably need to look at doing a bit of a debrief. We'll get a report back from the group. We've got 5 sections, and if you say 40 minutes, that's 8 minutes each person at least coaching for.
So Pauline, if I'm understanding correctly, and for the group, you can ask questions. The first thing that you'll do is assume that you are coaching the first group meeting. Is that correct? And
Or coaching Wanda for the first time.
okay, so which would you prefer, one or the other, or they can go either direction?
Whichever way your group got to. It
Okay.
sounded like you'd already played a little bit of Wanda in your group. Correct, Lori?
Yeah, I mean, I think our group decided to go with Wanda first.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we'll take that 40 minutes after we decide for sure which our group is doing, Wanda or the first group meeting. Then the members will each, those present in the breakout group will select one of these functions that they will be coaching toward. And then we'll just rotate through that, each person roughly 8 minutes or so that each person gets some practice.
That's correct.
Okay.
Practice coaching.
Will that feel good?
Everybody good?
All right.
Okay.
You're doing super. Okay, Margie, thank you for setting those up again, and we'll jump into this.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
I agree.
We, I think we solved World War problems.
Where would you like us to go with this, Pauline?
Okay. What happened? First question, we'll do the same thing. What happened?
I think we, at least our group, collectively exposed, and we all know this, just how many things go into a team. Number one, effectively working well together, but then also the complexities of everyone being aligned to the external communication, which we just loosely danced on. And so again, I'll just say, reflecting on all that I've been part of, it's amazing how successful they've been. Because I don't actually think I've really, again, I've always keep giving the basketball analogy, I've always subbed in or whatever, someone subbed in, and we just keep rolling, and we've never really done that investment to how do we collectively work together, both internal collectively and then external, communicate what we're doing well together. That's kind of my thing, is just the constant exposure to how complicated teams are.
Beautiful, beautiful. And our team, what happened?
Kind of disproportionately stayed in the individual coaching of Wanda space and planning for the group session, which I think ended up being a meritorious conversation, but we didn't pivot super well into the actual group coaching. And some of that's just the arbitrariness of the assignment we had. But I think we all took away a lot of different ideas about how preparation for a group session is really critical. You know, in the course of that conversation, just realizing like, man, we took 40 minutes basically planning for the first group session, and that's not enough time. Like we spent our whole time doing that. There's no way I would be super excited to go do that first group session yet with just that 40 minutes. So that was maybe my individual epiphany. I see some nodding heads in agreement.
What worked really, really well? And what would be even better if?
I thought we flowed well from one to the other. As a side note, Wes did a superb job playing 5 different team members, since we were a little short on team members. But I thought we flowed really well in the coaching. It was clear that we were each listening and picked up, not that that's so much a reflection, but you really have to listen and flow through the conversation because there's no script. As sort of a little individual shadowing of the bigger role of a team, we spent the first 5 or 7 minutes trying to clarify what the expectations for the task was, where we who was doing what and what were the roles. And man, I think that's like the big, almost the megaphone of that's what teams struggle with. So it was probably worth the time to clarify, but we said, we're not clear on this. What are we, not right or wrong, but sort of how are we doing this and who's doing what? And I was like, whoa, this is what teams are dealing with. So what would have been better is if we had some clear definition and instructions. And what went well is we flowed well together.
Yeah. And I appreciate Lori and Wes stepping in on that, because Dorothy and I were taking that. And unfortunately, without a lot of instructions, Wes and Lori were able to navigate. So awesome job. Awesome job. And so anything else from the group? And then I'm going to hand back over to Wes and we do our final pieces of wrapping up. But I want to learn, I would love to know what everybody's learning and taking away from this session in particular. And Galen alluded to it. We've got to have this, lots of planning and lots of, conversation around clarity about what is it that we're doing, who's taking what role. Yeah, thanks, Michaela. It's complicated. What are we learning? Chris? Then I go to Elizabeth, then I'll go to Ryan.
No, I'll just echo what Michaela said. It's complicated and so nuanced, right? So it's difficult to go on with these pre sort of assumptions, basically. Kind of, it's best, I think, I feel, to go in with more open mind and not make too many assumptions, because it's gonna, the dynamics are so different from team to team, individual in each individual. So
Elizabeth, and then Ryan, then Raquel, then Rihanna.
Sure. I'll build on Chris because I think it's similar in not making assumptions. One of the things that Josh did when he was interviewing or coaching Wanda was to ask about, what role do you want me to play? And I think that was an assumption I had made, is that coaches are going to facilitate. And I really loved that aha moment. And also, I do think there's a lot of opportunity as you're doing a preparation meeting. You hear from the person in front of you that you're coaching perceptions of maybe the team or the situation, and maintaining that open mind when you go to the full team to make additional observations and listen and be present to understand if there's variation in how each team member is experiencing the group and the work.
Right. Thanks, Elizabeth. Ryan, Raquel, Rihanna, then Dan.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize the complexity. This is not that. But I keep going back to, I think, Wes in the first or second lecture he ever gave, the 4 C's. And where I'm going with this is, like Wes was playing 3 different versions of himself. And Wes, like, someone asked a simple question, like, what are you worried about ever? And just Wes going through each of his various hats about the ER, the peds, this is what I'm worried about. Like, just the person, like, asking those curious questions calmly, and being in an environment where people assume good intent. I actually thought Wes achieved better balance in his own brain by listening to the 3 versions of himself talk. So again, that's just it. The U coaching model, the core topics, they play out whether it's an individual, a dyad, or a group.
Yeah. The fortune of having Wes in your group. that extra, personality shift is good. Raquel, and then Rihanna, then Dan. Then we'll go to Josh.
Thanks, Pauline. I think what I learned today that I really loved seeing modeled was our team managing. We did the team coaching and practicing managing up that leader. I really loved how everyone reflected back. You could see that in a real world environment, what a positive impact that would create to keep that conversation going. So I appreciated learning and seeing that today.
I'd love to see you all in a regular work meeting now doing that,
Mhm.
and shifting the dynamic of your teams. Rihanna, Dan, Michaela, then Josh, then Galen.
Yeah, thanks. For me, it's really just sort of thinking about, right, we said it earlier, is coaching the team towards goals, right? Versus then, sort of sorting out how they're working together as a team and how do you keep those two things in mind at the same time. So that's what I learned. I don't know how to do, but I've learned it.
Dan, then Michaela, then Josh.
Yeah, I found those practice sessions really good, and I really do believe, Pauline, you're able to leverage some of those awkward silences to drive us to think about what needs to be done, sometimes to use the structure of your modules, but at other times to, really just listen carefully and run with something. It was great.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Michaela?
Yeah, I think I'll take away mostly that this will influence how I'm coaching people that are leading teams, that are part of a team. Mostly, I think I'll stay away from actually coaching teams for quite some time because I'm just have such limited confidence that I'll be able to do it justice. But if I was put in that position, I think I would be very deliberate in going back and planning and be aware of the potential risks that are involved, but with just jumping into something not in an intentional way.
Beautiful, beautiful. You at least now, Nina, know what to ask for when you get a coach into your team. Okay. Josh, Galen, and then Frank, if it's safe to do so.
Little reiterative with some of the other comments, but at the end of the day, the core of our coaching principles are the same in this group coaching setting, right? And I even, as I was coaching Wanda, I shared with the group earlier that I was like, oh, we're planning for the session, but also don't forget the U model, because we were kind of planning, which was making us jump across from top of the U to the other top of the U. And so I asked a question to drive Wanda back down to the bottom of the U, and it actually opened up the dialogue quite a bit right before we transition. And I was like, so, listening, observing, forcing people down into the U, it all still applies. It all still is the core of what we would be doing in a group setting too.
Beautiful. Galen, then Frank, if it's safe to do so.
I appreciate you asking, and I think what I'm really learning is that the gift and the benefit is really having the team stop to consider some of these questions, and I feel less constrained about hitting the exact, which competency did we cover, because they're all overlapping. And I believe most of you could nod at this, but so many of the teams I've been on from moment one, we're at 60 miles an hour and what are the metrics and what are the primary, and here's the division I'm in charge about, and you need more space and so do I do. And we're into results before we've ever stopped and talked about how do we handle conflict or how do we make sure voices are heard. So I could see coaching a leader and saying, oh, my team's struggling, or well, what if we did? So I almost feel like I would encourage it, because I feel like the gift is getting the team to pause and consider these things. So that's what I'm learning, is that in healthcare, we would gain so much from the team pausing and establishing norms and thinking through these hurdles and revisiting, that would get us a lot farther.
Thanks, Galen. Frank, then Lori,
Yeah,
then Wes.
Yeah, thanks. I not to make assumptions. I started this session making some assumptions about, oh, there's probably dysfunction on the team. This is the problems that we have to work on. And yeah, sometimes teams are working okay, and there's people that are functioning really well, highlighting those and maximizing those and building on those successes. I think there's more opportunity there than I initially had recognized. So I'm going to not make as many assumptions, and I'll need to drop them in my dentist's parking lot. So I got to go in. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Lori, then I'm going to hand to Wes. Lori.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a really, I think important topic and opportunity in coaching. I love it. And I'm glad that we are able to share a little glimpse of it with you to kind of just get your input, your feeling, your knowing that it's an opportunity at some point in your coaching career. And that some of the things that we did go over today, you can actually be using now in the team and group coaching. I mean, just in the conversations and interactions that you have. So even if it's not a full-blown coaching engagement.
Thanks, Lori. And Wes.
I was just reflecting back when we first started this coaching academy. Many of you expressed a lack of confidence in your ability to do this. And at first, as we were talking about models and what needs to happen, that was the feedback that we were getting was, wait a minute, this is too much, I don't know, not sure how I can get to, and yet your comfort level and expertise with it appears to me to be significant now. I think the same thing is true with group coaching. At first blush, it feels like a lot, but really your presence and your curiosity is the magic. You have the sensitivity, you have all these coaching skills. And so I think that if you can just show up with a calm, non-anxious presence and curiosity, then your intuitive ability to help the team navigate that will really provide that space for them to join you, to let go of some of their anxiousness that they would bring to any kind of new initiative. And you do that well already. So redefine success as how you show up and being curious, and let go of feeling like you have to have specific outcomes too quickly. There's some of those things that are first, the agreements and the goal setting, but just in terms of how you approach it, what you're bringing is going to be a real gift to them anyway. Just to have the chance to meet and not feel the pressure to make everything happen in the first session will be a real gift to them. The other thing I wanted to mention is we mentioned having a co-coach in these settings. When initially, especially before you've had some practice, I think that's a great idea. Even if they are mostly an observer, it sets you free to focus on just being curious and having someone else there to support and inviting them to ask a follow-up question. And that would be my only other observation is when I'm in the pressure of trying to manage this group, often it's easy for me to forget that I can ask a series of follow-up questions and then just be patient. And often in a conversation, it's when I've given them time to go beyond that initial response that's where the gold is. That, okay, now that I've said that and I felt like I took up my appropriate space and time, if I'm invited to share a little bit more, then okay, now I feel like I can relax just a little bit and go a little deeper. And so those would be some additional encouragements to me. Is there anything that anyone needs to say before we wrap up? And certainly, Pauline, you're included in that.
I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for for attending and being so willing to step into this area. And invitation, I think, is for next month. We are doing change and project coaching. I think change management and project coaching. So,
and that will really build on what we did today, because
it will
be a lot of similarities, setting objectives, building rules, so that they will help reinforce each other. We didn't ask at the beginning if anyone has any questions or concerns about your pro bono coaching or anything else. You're welcome to stay on and we can have those conversations. But otherwise, we'll be hopeful that Dirtic gets healthy, that Dan recovers, that everyone in Tampa survives and has minimal impact. I think I covered the waterfront on there. But meanwhile, thank you all for being here. And again, my deepest appreciation, Margie, for her help with the slides and for hosting this, and Pauline and Lori for bringing your wealth of experience. It's extremely valuable. And thanks to each of you for making this a lot of fun and very beneficial. I wish you well.
And Dorte for refining the case
And
study.
that's right.
Yes.
There's work on that. It's been a great collective effort. Thank you.
Collaborative teams.
You bet. Enjoy your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks
And-
all. Bye.